Strangulation. Asphyxiation. Methods that force the killer to be close, even intimate with their victim. Unlike poisoning, which can be done from a distance, these methods demand physical contact, strength, and endurance. They're primal, often personal, and leave a haunting impression. In the 1990s, cases of strangulation spanned the globe, occurring everywhere from crowded cities to quiet suburbs. Statistically, they made up a small but persistent percentage of homicides worldwide. But it's their nature that makes them stand out. These killings are often tied to personal relationships, domestic violence, or deeply rooted psychological motivations. They reveal a killer's need for dominance, control, and silence. Let's explore some of the most infamous strangulation and asphyxiation cases of the 1990s, looking into the minds of those who used these methods and the victims who suffered under them. Strangulation isn't just a method of murder, it's a statement. To strangle someone requires direct physical contact, proximity, and, often, rage or intent. In psychological terms, strangulation and asphyxiation show a profound need to control the victim completely, to take their life with one's own hands. For this reason, strangulation is often found in cases of domestic violence, where passion and possession go hand in hand. Iowa, 1997. Janine Vinsk's life was brutally ended by her estranged husband, Gary Vinsk. Friends and family described her as a kind-hearted woman trying to rebuild her life after separating from Gary. But Gary refused to let go. On a fateful evening, he broke into her home, beat her severely, and strangled her to death. Strangulation in this case symbolized the ultimate assertion of control, a physical manifestation of Gary's inability to accept Janine's independence. This act was premeditated, calculated, and devastating for the community. Few cases illustrate the ripple effect of domestic violence like the tragedy of Ruth Ann Downing and her two daughters. In 1996, Scott Allen Downing, 32, attacked his wife, Ruth Ann, in a fit of rage, beating her with a baseball bat before ending her life. But the horror didn't end there. Scott then turned his fury on their children. 7-year-old Cassie was strangled, her young life extinguished before it truly began. The youngest daughter, just 4 years old, barely survived Scott's attempt to drown and strangle her. Scott Allen Downing exemplifies the profile of a domestic abuser whose violence escalates to fatal levels. His methodical killing of his wife, Ruth Ann, and their 7-year-old daughter, Cassie, reveals both calculated cruelty and a complete breakdown of moral restraint. His failed attempt to kill their younger daughter suggests a determination to eliminate his perceived burdens entirely, possibly driven by psychological instability and unchecked rage. While strangulation often involved domestic disputes, asphyxiation, a method where the victim's breath is cut off without direct pressure to the neck, appeared in a different range of crimes, including some high-profile cases overseas. In Japan, asphyxiation was used in a series of mysterious cases involving the Aum Shinrikyo cult, infamous for their involvement in the 1995 Tokyo subway sarin attack.
Of the morning rush hour in the world's most crowded underground system, the madness of indiscriminate murder. More than 3,000 subway passengers were affected.
Led by Shoko Asahara, the group combined apocalyptic beliefs with intense rituals to control its members and eliminate dissent. Asphyxiation, often involving restraints and deprivation of air, was employed by Aum Shinrikyo as both punishment and indoctrination.
Several people had been seen planting packages at stations and on a number of trains. I saw a package wrapped in newspaper. It was leaking, said this man. Then the stinging fumes hit my eye.
Members who disobeyed or attempted to leave the group were sometimes subjected to extreme ascetic practices. These could involve physical restrictions like hanging victims upside down or binding them until they lost consciousness. These acts were justified by the cult as methods to purify the individual or bring them closer to enlightenment. Some incidents reportedly escalated to fatal levels, emphasizing the totalitarian grip the cult held over its followers. While Aum Shinrikyo is widely remembered for its chemical attacks, the group's internal brutality underscores its dangerous structure. It operated like a high-control authoritarian regime, exploiting isolation, fear, and physical harm to maintain dominance. The use of asphyxiation, as seen in some documented cases, was not only a means of punishment but also a horrifying symbol of complete submission to the group's ideology. These practices align with broader patterns of cult behavior, where extreme measures are often taken to ensure loyalty and suppress dissent, leaving victims in a state of vulnerability both physically and psychologically. In India, the 1990s saw an epidemic of dowry-related deaths, a harrowing trend rooted in economic disputes and patriarchal oppression. Many of these cases involve young brides being strangled or asphyxiated, their deaths staged as suicides or accidents to cover up the violence. A chilling example is the 1995 death of Manju Yadav in Uttar Pradesh. Just 2 years into her marriage, Manju was found dead in her in-laws' home under suspicious circumstances. Forensic evidence pointed to strangulation, yet her in-laws claimed it was suicide. Activists brought her case into the spotlight, revealing that her family had struggled to meet dowry demands. The case not only sparked outrage but also fueled reforms, including stricter enforcement of India's Dowry Prohibition Act. Back in the United States, the 1990s saw strangulation emerge as a chilling hallmark among some of the era's most notorious serial killers. Unlike crimes of passion or domestic disputes, these killers selected their victims with calculated precision, targeting vulnerable individuals and leaving behind a grim legacy. Strangulation became their signature, a method that reflected their need for control and their complete detachment from empathy or remorse. Gary Ridgway's reign of terror in the Pacific Northwest is one of the most prolific and chilling examples of serial murder in U.S. history. Dubbed the Green River Killer, Ridgway is confirmed to have killed at least 49 women, though he admitted to murdering upwards of 70. His victims were primarily young women, many of them sex workers or runaways, individuals often overlooked by society and thus vulnerable to predators like Ridgway.
On a scale of killers from 1 to 10, do you think you're one of the best of all time?
I rate myself as probably number 1.
So that's pretty damn good, isn't it?
That's pretty good, yeah.
Gary Ridgway was a paradox, a man who outwardly appeared mundane but concealed a deeply sinister side. Ridgway worked as a truck painter, was married 3 times, and was described by colleagues as quiet and reliable. But beneath this facade was a man driven by a need to dominate and dehumanize his victims. Ridgway's psyche was a twisted amalgamation of suppressed rage, sexual compulsion, and a need for control. Born in 1949, he grew up in a turbulent home with a domineering mother who reportedly humiliated him frequently. This unhealthy relationship sowed the seeds of his misogynistic tendencies.
My mom and dad talked about putting me in school.
You're crying as you remember that. Why are you crying?
Because I didn't want to go.
Ridgway later admitted that he often fantasized about killing women during sex, a desire that would eventually manifest in real-life violence. Ridgway's hatred for women, combined with his fascination with sex, was central to his motives. His murders were not only acts of domination but also a means to assert control over victims he considered disposable. He reportedly said he targeted sex workers because he believed no one would miss them, revealing a chilling lack of empathy.
And all the time she was trying to get me to do better in school and speaking to me that you worthless or disgrace me or yell at me. Didn't feel loved.
He also harbored a deep conflict between his devout religious beliefs and his own sexual urges, fueling a twisted sense of justification for his murders. Ridgway's method was methodical and horrifyingly efficient. Posing as a customer, he would lure his victims into his vehicle, often under the pretense of hiring them for sex. After driving to a secluded location, he would engage in intercourse before strangling them, usually with his bare hands or sometimes using ligatures such as ropes or belts. What made Ridgway particularly terrifying was his calculated approach to disposing of bodies. He would dump his victims near the Green River or in wooded areas, often revisiting the sites to engage in necrophilia, a detail that underscores his complete detachment from morality or empathy. For decades, Ridgway evaded justice, even as law enforcement pieced together the patterns of his killings. It wasn't until 2001, thanks to advancements in DNA technology, that he was definitively linked to the murders. Investigators matched Ridgway's DNA to evidence collected from multiple crime scenes, finally bringing him to justice. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, sparing him the death penalty in exchange for cooperating with authorities to locate additional victims.
Killing a woman was my releasing point. When I killed her, my hate for myself was gone for that day.
What drives someone to kill with their bare hands, or to use a belt, scarf, or rope to strangle someone? Unlike poisoning, strangulation is immediate, emotional. It's often an act of rage, impulsivity, or control. For the killer, strangulation represents domination. It's about taking control in the most physical sense possible, literally holding someone's life in their hands. In the United States during the 1990s, strangulation accounted for approximately 2 to 5% of all homicides. Globally, strangulation had a more prominent role in certain regions. In countries with strict gun control laws, like Japan and parts of Europe, it was a more frequently observed method in domestic homicides. Cultural factors also influenced the prevalence of strangulation, as the method often arose in crimes of opportunity where weapons were not readily available. Forensic science played a pivotal role in solving strangulation cases during after the 1990s. Medical examiners became adept at identifying key signs of asphyxiation. Ligature marks on the neck told investigators whether a rope, belt, or scarf was used. Petechial hemorrhaging, tiny blood spots in the eyes, revealed oxygen deprivation. A fractured highway bone, a small U-shaped bone in the neck, often indicated manual strangulation. These clues helped police identify and convict killers who might otherwise have walked free. Advances in DNA testing after the 1990s also meant that the skin cells or fibers left behind in a struggle could tie a murderer to their victim with unprecedented certainty. Strangulation is not the most common murder method. It's too personal, too emotionally charged. But that's precisely what makes it so chilling. Each case tells a story of a relationship gone wrong, of emotions spiraling out of control, of killers driven to an act that requires both strength and desperation. In the grand tapestry of 1990s murder trends, strangulation might seem like a small thread. But pull on it, and you'll find some of the most unforgettable and tragic stories of the decade. Next, we'll examine a murder method that doesn't require physical strength, but relies on weapons that are readily available.